What's up, everyone? Welcome to another edition of BookTube. I'm your host, Mr. Hammond. Thank you so much for coming back to my classroom. It's always a pleasure to have you here listening to me talk about books. Today, first time in a while, I have a very special guest to talk about a book.
Hi, I'm Deb.
And Deb is here to talk about the sequel to the book that we did previously. What book is this, Deb?
On the Come Up by Angie Thomas.
Man, it could only be you to be here to talk about this book since we had such an in-depth conversation about The Hate U Give. So now we're here with the sequel, On the Come Up by Angie Thomas. And it takes place a year after the events of Star's dilemma and the problem that she had and how everything played out. And we're now following a new character by the name of Bree, and she is a rapper. Is she on SoundCloud?
No, she's on Dat Cloud, but I'm not really sure what that is.
Dat Cloud is fictional, but it's a cross between SoundCloud and Dat Piff. SoundCloud is where you upload things. Dat Piff is where people have mixtapes, right? So before I get too ahead of myself, what we gotta do is that we have to compete to see who's gonna have first impressions. Last time we did rock, paper, scissors, and we all know how that turned out. This time, Mario Kart.
Okay.
Let's go! Oh,
wasn't even
yeah! I had the what's it called? Yeah, I had mushrooms. I used the mushrooms at the end.
That is foul.
Oh. I always loved playing as Luigi, mainly because I'm a middle child and my older brother got to play as Mario anytime. So Luigi's my man, and as you can see, it paid off. Mean and green for the win. You'll get better.
Possibly.
Possibly. So, my first impressions of this book. I love this book. Dare I say, more so than The Hate U Give. There is so much about this book that I enjoyed, mainly that it took all these pop culture references and made them feel like they were at home in the community that I grew up with. So it took things like, obviously there's some Harry Potter references and what's another one?
There is some Star Trek references or some Star Wars references.
Right. Definitely with the Star Wars, since she talks like Yoda every now and again.
Yep.
And they do it in a way where these characters are using slang to describe the nerdiest thing. And sometimes nerd culture can seem exclusive in terms of not being a black thing. Like it's mutually exclusive from being black. So to see all that intersectionality amongst the characters, that made me happy. But the other thing was that it seems so much less about race and it was more so about poverty. Like, how is it that, how are kids affected by growing up broke, by growing up in the hood, by growing up around drugs, and all that while trying to balance things like relationships and friendships, trying to do well in school, trying to find a passion. This, to me, in some ways it was more accessible, but in other ways, I thought that it's for a niche audience, which is strange to say because I loved it so much. I think it does everything better than The Hate U Give. What do you think?
Okay, so first impressions. I, just like you, I thought that this was a whole lot better than The Hate U Give.
Right, I thought so too.
Mostly because it did a better job of explaining what he said, poverty, and it did a better job of growing up with like parents that weren't very stable at some points and having to move households even though you didn't really want to when you were super young. Mm-hmm. And it has to do with like family drama and issues and having to provide for your family, even though like in most households parents are like, no, you shouldn't have to provide, I'm the one that should be doing that. And it kind of makes you feel like, dang, sometimes I need to help out too.
Right, but how real is the situation? Yeah, you're totally right.
Real.
Like the idea that Bree was working so hard to make it as a rapper and made some pretty questionable decisions because she felt this weight, this burden of not wanting to be a burden. She was like, I just gotta pull my weight. My brother, he's doing what he can. My mom, she's struggling and she doesn't have much. what can I do? And it's unfortunate that kids are placed in a position where they have to grow up before they should, but this is so real. I even think about some of the students we have here, and it's like, how could you ask a student to focus for 7 hours straight throughout the day and learn all this material and they probably haven't eaten? You know, or they probably were home and they couldn't talk to their mom and dad or something like that. Like, these are things that need to be considered. I'm so glad that Angie Thomas wrote this book. What'd you think about her school situation?
I think that it was not great considering that because of the neighborhood that she grew up in, she had to go to a school where they had metal detectors and police officers. But at the same time, I feel like it did really well with like teaching you about the things that kids have to go through in school, and like the way that some kids are black or Latinx and they still get treated way different than the white kids, and it doesn't really matter the school that you're at because it happens at all sorts of schools.
Right. I thought, with that being said, I thought it was interesting because she goes across town to go to this new school.
Yeah.
And the metal detectors didn't come into play until after there was an incident when they went through her bag and it was like candy or whatever. And, you know, we don't want to get into spoilers, but, you know, to leave one place to say like, hey, this isn't how I should grow up, to go to another place where it's supposed to be better and then treat it as if you don't belong there could be really demoralizing. Like, and the way Angie Thomas captures it on, you know, different levels with how the teachers look at her, how the principal talks to her, how she doesn't want to go to school, or how she gets these panic attacks over what happened was pretty awesome. Like, it's not awesome that kids are going through this, but it's awesome that it was captured in a book, right? That was cool. Yeah. Okay, we got to get into the meat of this. And the real thing is the rapping. The rapping, the lyrics, the things that Angie Thomas does with music in this book. What'd you think about the rapping, Dad?
I thought it was amazing. She does such a great job in literally just explaining everything that goes through her head while she's about to have like a freestyle battle, because it goes through all the thoughts that she's thinking about and like her way of figuring out what she's gonna do and how everything's gonna come out of her mouth. And it does so much explaining that, but in her mind, it's literally like split-second decisions.
That freestyle battle, so she does like maybe like 2 of them or something like that.
Yeah.
And
she does 2 in the beginning on the same day, and then 1 at the end, which isn't anticipated.
Right. And like the way she thinks about it, just like you said, was dope. But what I loved even more, so Angie Thomas did this thing. She like, it's like her writing just got so much better. Because this is like a 450-page book, and she had this one thread that went continuously through the story where every time Bree went through something, she was like, oh, I'm feeling this. And then she would take that word and say, rhymes with this. And she'd make a whole line for it. And like that adds to that last rap that she does at the end. Like, she goes through this experience and she constantly reflects on what she's dealing with through rap because that's what she knows. And it was pretty awesome. You know what part I like? What was my favorite part? And normally we don't talk about specific parts on our book too because we just want you to know how we feel. But when they were on the bus listening to her rhyme for the first time and everyone was responding, it was that one kid, like the way Angie describes it, like he was talking into his fist and he was like, on God, like, oh, that is just the way that she captured Black teenage life was like
spot on.
So spot on. Now, do you feel that you're reflected in this book more so than others?
I feel like not necessarily because I haven't been through any of the things that she's went through, and I know there's like thousands of teens in the U.S. that have, but I just don't really have that experience. And at the same time, I wish I had that insight, but at the same time, I'm really not, and I'm grateful that I don't have to go through all that.
Right. Which is true. Yeah, no one wants to be broke. No one chooses to be broke. And the thing is that when you really look at it, is that people are just trying their best every day. And her mom says this in the book. It's like the only crime that I ever committed was being poor.
Yeah.
When everyone was just coming at her. And I thought, like all the characters in the book, I was about mostly all of them. There's like 1 or 2 characters I didn't enjoy. But her mom was by far my favorite. Like her perseverance.
Because she's a realist.
Ooh.
Everything she says has some severity to it.
But a lot of that is because she lived, right? She made mistakes, like after things went, after she, I don't want to spoil. We don't want to spoil. No spoilers here. But, coming from what she did, like that change, that was hard. And like sometimes people don't give you the space to change. And all you can do is be consistent in that effort to change.
Especially considering that people are pushing you down with the judgment, and she just pushed past and persevered through everything and did what she had to do for her kids.
Right. It was so beautiful. Like, this is like a tribute to any, young teen with a dream. It's a tribute to any parent who are trying to make ends meet. And also, let's not forget the brother who, this hit me hard in the heart when it's like, this guy, he was one of the kids who got out the hood, went to college, top of his class, the man on campus, comes back home, has to work in a pizzeria. Like, when I tell y'all stories all the time, like about college, like I remember one of the first, maybe second weeks of school, I told y'all about how I had to eat like 25-cent cans of oysters because I was broke. But this guy, same deal, is that he did everything he was supposed to be and it did not go as planned. And you gotta keep reading to find out what happens though. Whew. Once again, we don't really discuss the plot here. We want you to read the book for yourself. We really want to talk about impressions. Like, why did we read the book? Why did I give out the book? It's just great stuff. But I have so many favorite parts in this book, and it's hard to not spoil parts of the plot. So the one thing I am going to tell you, the one thing is that when Bree is out there freestyling, whenever she's rapping, and they mention, Angie Thomas makes it a point to tell you exactly what beat she's listening to. I always went in, I put my headphones on, I put that instrumental on, and I looped it through that whole section. And it was so immersive. Like, I can't believe that Angie Thomas is such a skilled writer that she can get all these descriptions, get all this dialogue, make everyone fleshed out, and then also nail the rapping. Did you know it's going to be a movie?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Yeah, I remember you telling me that.
Yeah, I bet they're gonna, like, they're looking for YouTube rappers, someone right now who could match Bree's flow to do all those lines. So what was something that you really favored? We're just gonna touch on the plot just a little bit. What was something that you were really into?
My favorite part was when they were really struggling to the point where like they had to go to food pantries.
My heart.
And they were in there just looking around, and they were walking through with their basket and their freight to get food handed to them in like canned goods. And then Bree walks over to the clothes table. Mind you, her Timbs aren't actual Timbs.
No.
She got them from, what was it? It was...
She got them from like the thrift store
Yeah.
or from like but they weren't Timbs at all. They just looked at,
Yeah.
like she used to go over them with a Sharpie.
Mm-hmm. Whenever the leather kind of chipped off, she used to take a black Sharpie to them. And then she found this pair of real Timbs, but they had a little scuff on the tip of the boot. And even though they looked like that, she was so excited to have her first pair of real Timbs that she really wanted them. And it kind of just gives you a look into her life, because you don't really realize how bad you're struggling until you have to ask for help.
Right, and what I love so much about this book, because they hang that there. I read a review on Goodreads. It made me so mad. Someone was like, "Oh, like it would have been a good book, but Bree makes so many mistakes. Like she should have learned from them."
She's a child.
She's 16 and she's going through it. Did you know? You know something? It's called like the ACE test, the ACE numbers. So when you're experiencing trauma, when you're going through things like hunger, when you don't have heat, when you don't know where your parents are, things like that, you are in such a high level of anxiety and tension that you can't formulate or process what you're going through in order to make decisions, not for today, but for tomorrow. So when you read this book, every mistake Bree makes is a result of her struggling in other aspects of her life that she has no control over. So it's just like, I just feel like anyone who works with a kid needs to consider this. You need to read this book. Like, you have to. Stop everything. Stop watching this. Go read it. It's so important. And what Bree learns at the end, what I love so much, is that it comes full circle. Everything works out, and she just learns to not sell herself short, right? To lean on the ones that she has to lean on, play her position, while also making strides for what she wants, while not selling herself, like not selling her soul. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right. You feel like people would benefit from reading this?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think that it's a really good book to read, especially when you're not really understanding teenage life.
Right, especially life of teenagers who may be impoverished, who may come from non-traditional homes, and just also all the black culture, man. The slang in this, I learned so much stuff. Like they were like A1, that's slang. Out of pocket, that's slang.
Oh my mama.
On my mama.
So many times.
On God. You know what? On God fan. The on the come up. Oh, let me do that again. And then you're gonna show the book. Ready? Okay. On God fan, on the come up. This is definitely a story worth sharing. Wouldn't you agree?
It's an amazing book, yeah.
Good work, Angie Thomas. We can't wait for your next one.